Welcome to Nuclear Energy in Korea, a podcast to promote discussion of major issues and challenges in U.S. and Korean nuclear energy. I'm Alan Ahn, and I'll be your host today. I'm speaking with Dr. Gail Marcus, the first woman to earn a doctorate in nuclear engineering in the United States. She has held numerous high-level posts during her career, including Deputy Director General of the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency, Principal Deputy Director of the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy, Science and Technology, Assistant Chief of the Science Policy Research Division at the Congressional Research Service, and President of the American Nuclear Society. She currently serves as an independent consultant on nuclear energy policy issues. Dr. Marcus, thank you very much for speaking with us today.
My pleasure.
Just to start off, Dr. Marcus, you're the first female to receive a PhD in nuclear engineering in the U.S. I'm certain it's likely that you've faced obstacles in establishing your career in this field. Was there anything that drew you to nuclear engineering, and what were some of the challenges you experienced along the way?
I'm glad you asked that question. My career didn't follow what I think is the usual path, but it's been fun. First of all, what drew me to nuclear engineering, I didn't have a clue about it at first. I was always interested in science. I guess that came from my parents. My father is an electrical engineer, and my mother was an elementary school teacher. She had actually told me that she was interested in science in college, but in her era, she didn't think she could get a job, so she changed her field. I started in physics, and I was majoring in physics at MIT and was interested in what's called low energy reactions of protons and neutrons with materials. And I was engaged, and my husband to be was going to be continuing at MIT, and the MIT physics department wasn't doing much in that field. It was really focused more on high energy physics. So my husband said, "How about that nuclear engineering department?" And I said, "Oh, all right, I'll take some engineering courses so I can do my physics here." And of course, I got more interested in the engineering side, in the safety side, and ultimately in the policy side. Now, the challenges, I guess everybody faces some challenges, and maybe everybody has some opportunities, at least I hope so. There were some challenges. We could go on for an hour about some of the statements made to me that probably people would not make today. Initially, I did not get a job in nuclear engineering, in a nuclear engineering organization. I ended up in the military-industrial complex, and I did a few nuclear things, but I mainly did other things. One of the other things happened to be simulators for pilot training. Now, when you think about it, simulators are very important for nuclear training, too, so sometimes things come full circle in a way you don't even expect. So I could talk about negative things, but actually I've had some people who were very supportive and some good opportunities, and if there were challenges, I like to hope I overcame them. I'm pretty satisfied that I've had an interesting and varied career and done some interesting things, and I think that's how I like to think of it, rather than obsessing over what might have been.
Perhaps that could be another interview topic on its own another day.
That would be a more fun one.
We hosted you as a speaker during a briefing on the Hill on the role of nuclear in a diverse energy portfolio. The current administration fully endorses an all-of-the-above energy strategy, and you most definitely advocate having a great diversity of energy sources. Why nuclear? What's nuclear's place in the energy mix and its relative strengths and weaknesses versus other energy technologies?
Well, first, yes, I want to reinforce that I do believe in diversity. At that briefing, I drew an analogy, always risky, but I drew an analogy to diet, where even if you love one food and even if it's very healthy, you wouldn't want to limit yourself to just yogurt or just blueberries or something like that. The same thing with energy. I think for a lot of reasons, for security of supply, for resilience, if something goes wrong with something, to spread the negatives, because every technology has some negatives, it's good to have diversity. Diversity also fits certain niches better, certain kinds of places. But to answer your question, so what's the role of nuclear in this diverse mix? If you look at the kinds of needs that our energy supply has to meet, reliability, cleanliness, security, consistency, baseload, nuclear comes out high in many of those. It doesn't have the pollutants of fossil fuels. It doesn't have the intermittency of renewables. The supply is a large amount domestic or from countries that are reliable allies, so we don't have a security problem. What are the drawbacks? Yes, as in every technology, there are some drawbacks. And one, there are at least some public perception problems. A lot of utility executives maybe think twice or 3 times or 4 times before they want to tackle a technology where they're going to have to overcome the local public negative sentiment. There's a large upfront investment, and that's, for business people, that's a source of insecurity. Those are 2 of the main things. Other things I think are all can be addressed, but those are 2 of the things that I think give people pause.
Low natural gas prices have been a source of competition for the nuclear industry in the U.S., and utilities have, as you might say, short-sightedly closed nuclear plants in favor of natural gas generation. And as you mentioned, you also have broad sections of the public who are perhaps blindly anti-nuclear and believe that renewables can produce all of our low-carbon electricity. How do we overcome these economic and public acceptance challenges that nuclear is currently facing?
Well, first, I do want to balance my statement a little bit. I think maybe broad sections of the public is a little overly broad. There actually surveys show that a significant fraction of the public is either in favor of nuclear power or neutral to it. It varies regionally. It's a very complex question in itself.
Sure.
But I'm actually heartened, especially just 3 years after Fukushima, that public opinion is really still relatively robust, and that to me that indicates that maybe a lot of people have a realization that renewables can't do everything and that they need a diverse mix. Now, that doesn't mean everybody agrees with that, and I think there's still an education need to educate people as to what the limitations are of all different technologies. But the best way to, looking at nuclear itself, the best way to overcome public acceptance challenges is, first of all, by safe operation. Nothing scares people more than an incident anywhere. And the longer we can go with safe operation, the more people begin to trust the technology. The other problem we're now facing, specifically with respect to natural gas, is one that's not really in my realm of expertise. And I must say I do not fully understand why, but some of the pricing mechanisms that are being used now in the electricity market are really damaging to nuclear power. Some, I understand, are put in place to encourage renewables, and that's fine. But rather than encouraging renewables to replace fossil fuels and therefore add to the clean energy supply, they are really working against baseload power like nuclear. So you are getting a couple of plants that announced shutdowns in the past year. You're replacing one clean energy source with another clean energy source, and you're not increasing the net clean energy source. So something has to be done about that. That's not in my position description, but it is the challenge right now.
Japan is perhaps where the fiercest debate over nuclear power is taking place. One of the perceived keys to reviving nuclear in Japan has been the creation of a competent and independent nuclear regulatory authority. But as is often discussed, there is a fine line between independence and isolation. How does the new Japanese regulatory body walk this fine line, and what must be its priorities in regaining trust and confidence in nuclear power?
I'm very glad you asked that question because actually that issue of independence and isolation relates to some work I did when I was at the NRC, working for Commissioner Kenneth Rogers, and on what became the principles of good regulation. And one of the areas we addressed was the concern that some people in the agency were beginning to think that the way to be independent was not to talk to anybody. And I actually had some bosses at the NRC who said that I should go, if I go to a meeting, I shouldn't talk to people from industry, which is a bizarre interpretation, but it maybe looked like the easy one. But let me say one before I go further on that. Let me say one thing. One problem Japan has is once public confidence has been lost, it's very hard to regain. It's like confidence in anything, in another person. You don't just say, "Oh well, okay, I've cleaned up my act, and now you trust me." It's going to be a long, difficult road, I'm afraid, for Japan. One thing that's pressing, as you say, the government to restart nuclear plants is the state of the economy and the results as a result of the shutdown. It's something that maybe the average person doesn't necessarily see. Some people see it because some industries have been moved offshore, some industrial activities. Some people certainly see a loss of convenience and a loss of comfort. Temperatures in offices are higher in the summer and lower in the winter, and there's less lighting and things like that. But the impact of that grows over time, and if Japan doesn't restart some, and I guess I should add the cost of buying fuel to replace some of the nuclear power plants, and if Japan doesn't do something soon, there is going to be an impact there, which may turn public opinion around somewhat, but it would be rather late. Now, as far as the regulator, I think, as I say, NRC had to learn this too, and the best thing they can do, I think, is be transparent and explain their decisions. It's not that they should not talk to people, and I see some disturbing tendency. I'm hearing reports of people who go and ask to talk to the regulator, and they say no. The thing is, they should talk to everybody. They should talk to foreign people, they should talk to the industry, they should talk to the public, but they should be transparent about their decisions and explain them so that that the public does not feel that they're making decisions in a closed room. Okay, you're my friend in the industry, I'll do what you want. That there's a good logical reason for their decisions, and that's why they're making the decisions, not because the utility asked them. Not because the vendor asked them. And that, I think, to me, would be the best thing they could do.
On this topic of regulation, and as you said, you worked for the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission for some time, and a good portion of your background and expertise revolves around nuclear regulatory issues. The NRC is considered to be the finest of nuclear regulatory regimes in the world today, and generally wherever American technology has been imported, American regulatory practices have also been adopted. How important is it for the U.S. to remain engaged in the global nuclear marketplace for this reason?
You know, that is a complicated question. I think it is good for the U.S. to stay involved in the global nuclear marketplace, But a lot of things have changed. So what you said about where American technology has been imported, American regulatory practices have been adopted, that's true. But I'm not sure that's the only way to do things. And I'm not sure even with new countries today that it would necessarily happen that way. First of all, companies have become multinational. It's almost hard to say anymore what is an American company.
Definitely.
And we have technologies that have been developed and sold by American companies in the past, but if they sell a new reactor now that they've partnered with Japan or with a company in another country, will it be American or will it be some combination? That's one thing. Secondly, I think the international community is much more connected than they used to be. We have a lot of work done in IAEA and the OECD NEA, and a lot of opportunities for regulators to sit down together from different countries, for the people in utilities to sit down together. And I think there are avenues to share best practices that did not exist 20 years ago or so when some of these reactors were sold, that were just American technology and were sold sort of with the regulation attached to them.
In regions that have traditionally deployed nuclear power, such as North America and Europe, the pace of new build is slowing down, whereas in Asia and countries such as China, India, and South Korea, there continues to be a strong push in nuclear construction projects. How do you assess this changing global landscape, and how important will cooperation with Asia be?
Well, first of all, I think that changing landscape is a totally logical evolution. And somehow it seems to take us by surprise, but it shouldn't. When you look at the population of those countries and you look at the energy supply they now have compared to what we have in the U.S. and North America and in Europe, it's got to be that's the place that more is needed. And also, when you look at a lot of what they have now is coal and is dirty. They have a huge need compared to the traditional developed world, North America and Europe. So that shift we should have expected, even if we don't seem to have expected. And I guess, so yes, cooperation will be very important. And I would go back to what I said in answer to the previous question. We've got to share best practices in some way. If we share it because we sell technology, that's one way of doing it. If we share it because we sit around a table at a meeting in Vienna or in Paris, that's another way. If it's the industry side, if they share it by sitting down in a WANO meeting, World Association of Nuclear Operators, that's another way. And I think all these ways have to be in practice.
Going from maybe regulatory issues to technology issues, the light water reactor is by far the dominant technology in commercial nuclear power today. In a book you recently authored called Nuclear Firsts, Milestones on the Road to Nuclear Power Development, you list a wide variety of non-light water reactor technologies: molten salt reactors, very high temperature reactors, pebble bed, thorium reactors, all of which may address some of the concerns over nuclear power in some way or another, whether through enhanced safety, minimized waste, greater proliferation resistance. In your opinion, since you've written a book on this topic, in examining current developments in nuclear energy, research, state of the industry, state of the current energy landscape, in what areas do you see the most promise?
Interesting question. I think if the book teaches any lesson, it's that it is very, very hard to anticipate what technology will come to the fore. All of these technologies, as you say, were in my book. They were all researched 40 or 50 years ago. When I joined the Department of Energy and we were starting the new Generation 4 program, and I went around and gave briefings, I would talk about all these new technologies, molten salt, gas cooled, liquid metal, and some old timers in the audience would say, "That's very nice, Dr. Marcus, but we worked on that 40 years ago." Sometimes the reasons that one technology rises and another doesn't is not totally logical. If you would analyze best this, best that, certainly in the nuclear area there were pressures, the Naval Propulsion Program and things like that, that tended to push us in one direction. But I think that sometimes happens in other technologies too. I'm not the expert in these technologies, but I understand in the beginning, in the automobile industry, there were multiple technologies being developed, and for whatever reasons, the focus was on one. And now with the concern over pollution and oil supply and all of that, I think maybe we're beginning to move in another direction. The same thing could happen in the nuclear area, but everything hasn't lined up yet. We can't really tell yet. There's certainly a lot of experience with light water reactors, which creates a strong pressure to stay with those. However, there are other factors that could drive us in another direction. So, for example, if some of these technologies are good for high temperature applications, process heat, if we start to develop it and use them and people are talking about doing that, if we really start to use them for process heat, perhaps they'll develop, and perhaps people will start thinking about them for electricity generation as well. Maybe we're going to decide to try to burn up some of our used fuel that way. If we try to do that, it may drive that technology forward. I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't know right now whether any of these factors are going to be important enough. They're certainly all good technologies. There are people working on them, and some of them could solve some problems and so therefore could become more important in the future.
Going from more speculative to more immediate term issues, the U.S. Has made considerable investment into small modular reactors. On the surface, SMRs appear to make a lot of sense given sensitivity to safety issues and projections for energy demand that are quite modest in the U.S. However, considering the great deal of uncertainty, as you just mentioned, regarding new technologies, how would you evaluate the direction of the SMR development program in the U.S.?
I would have, in a way, some of the same comments. This is nearer term, some of these technologies, but they are also not yet fully developed. And I'm reminded of the famous quote from Admiral Rickover about paper reactors versus real reactors. And I don't have the quote exactly, but basically everything looks good on paper. It looks like there are no technical problems, and it'll be cheap to build and easy and quick. And then when you start doing things, it's harder. I'm not saying that that's definitely true, but every time I hear about all the wonderful things with the reactors that haven't been built, I'd love to see a couple built and see if they meet the promise. It certainly looks like they can, at least technically. Some of the things, everything that's said, I think is potentially true, but are there going to be some obstacles when the safety case is fully evaluated? Are there going to be some issues? We don't know. I think the right things are going on right now, so if you ask me how I evaluate the direction of the program, we have several companies involved in developing different technologies. Some of them are partnering with users, with utilities, so they are getting some input that will help them match their technology to the need. The government is providing some support, and You could always wish for more, but in this financial situation of the U.S., I think it's a very positive thing that we have support for this program. So that's all good. Now, what direction it ends up taking will depend on a lot of things. And just as I said for the other technologies, even for the SMRs that are light water technologies, some of them have more passive safety features. Some of them, they say, won't have to use water for cooling. So they could be used in different places. They could meet different niche needs. To replace the building of a 1,000 megawatt or 1,500 megawatt reactor, that is a bigger challenge because there the economics, to put in a remote place one small reactor, there's a good economic case and other case that it may be good. To replace larger technologies, we may have, people say because you can build incrementally that you can spread out the expenditure, and that's good. But if you really want to build 1,500 megawatts in a short time, how does it compete with large reactors? You get some economies from manufacturing, but you lose some economies of scale, and the final word isn't in on what the balance is on those.
Well, I believe we have time for perhaps one final question, and on this topic of SMRs, there seems to be quite a number of national SMR programs similar to that of the U.S. program, countries such as Argentina, Korea, South Africa, Japan. Is there room for cooperation in this area, or are all of these countries trying to, I guess, get ahead and assert their own designs and technologies?
Well, in the first place, I'm not going to speculate on the motives of other countries. It certainly seems now there are a number of you would say competing technologies, but there are a number of competing small reactor technologies in the U.S. too. What happens eventually, it's not absolutely clear now. I think there tends to be a sorting out of these things depending on which companies have more money to spend or which technologies governments support and how much, and what utilities buy onto these things, and some of these countries have technologies that have some similarities, and one could imagine that there could be a sort of a multinational something or other developing later on. I can't at this point speculate on how that might happen. But it's a very interesting time, certainly, for nuclear power, with the consideration of these small reactors, and with the thoughts about a new generation of perhaps non-light water reactors. So it's an interesting place to be to watch what's going to happen in the future.
Well, Dr. Marcus, unfortunately, I believe we are out of time. It's been our honor to host you. Thank you so much for spending the time to speak with us today.
My pleasure.